but nothing like you.
Welcome to ImaginativVisions.com Nostalgia Trip. Justin here, and today we are going to journey back to the year 2007 when we talk about the G4 hit, Cold Monkey. So let's talk about it. Before gaming culture became the center of mainstream entertainment, there was a time when television was trying to figure out how to speak to gamers. G4 was one of the few networks built around that idea. It had game reviews, tech shows, convention coverage, previews, and cheat codes, and personalities who treated video games like more than a hobby. In that experimental cable TV era, Cold Monkeys arrived as one of the network's more unusual but original shows. Created by Adam De La Pena, Cold Monkeys arrived on G4 from 2007 to 2008, and it ran for 2 seasons. On paper, it was a workplace comedy about fictional video game company in the early 1980s. In execution, it was something much more grander. The entire show looked like an 8-bit video game, complete with pixelated characters, side-scrolling environments, score counters, visual gags, and references packed into nearly every frame. This was a show for gamers. It was crude, loud, immature, clever, and very much a product of its time. But you know what? That's what made it special. Cold Monkey's show premise was simple but was definitely effective. Instead of making a cartoon about people who play games, Cold Monkeys focused on the people making them during the wild early days of the industry. The fictional company GameaVision worked as a parody of early game companies, blending the spirit of Atari, Activision, and a broader home console boom. The story follows our two main protagonists, Dave and Jerry. They're two programmers working at the company GameaVision. Dave is the reckless slacker genius that somehow is really gifted with game development. You know, the kind of guy who somehow can make a game work while also destroying everything else around him. Jerry, on the other hand, is more responsible, nervous, and constantly stuck dealing with Dave's bad decisions. This dynamic actually drives the show, and it works. It's not a characterization that's new under the sun. We have seen plenty of comedies where it's a duo. One is the wild one that creates all the hijinks, and the other one is the straight laced one that has to clean up the mess. Dave causes trouble, Jerry panics, and Game of Vision somehow keeps moving forward despite being one disaster away from collapse. The company is run by Mr. Larity, an oil businessman who buys Gameavision despite knowing very little about video games. That setup gives the show one of its strongest comedic engines. Larry represents every clueless executive who sees a growing industry and wants to cash in without understanding the people, creativity, or culture and art behind it. That is for another day. And why does that sound so familiar in 2026? Through Gameavision, Cold Monkeys turns the workplace into a pixelated disaster zone filled with bad ideas, rush projects, and office chaos and gaming references that us gamers and geeks 100% appreciated at the time. Dave, Jerry, and Mr. Larity were truly the faces of the show, and a lot of the show's episodes were heavily centered around those three. But that doesn't mean that Cold Monkeys didn't have some really cool supporting characters as well. Before I talk about the supporting cast, I just have to stress this because I know there might be one person in the comment section that might leave something that's just going to be like, you really just don't get that this was a different time period. Here's a reminder once again. Cold Monkeys was a late 2000s adult animated comedy. A lot of its humor leans into crude jokes, broad personalities, workplace absurdities, tropes, and stereotypes that were common in that era of cable television. Some of it still works because of the show's ridiculous energy and gamer satire. Some of it may hit differently for new viewers who probably just catch it in the year 2026. That context matters, folks. Cold Monkeys was not trying to be polished, careful, or politically correct. It was loud, offensive, immature, and built around pushing jokes as far as possible. That does not erase its place in gamer comedy history, but it does mean that the supporting cast should be viewed through the lens of when the show was made. Okay, so leave your, oh my God, this show was sexist, this show was racist, this was offensive to yourselves. Different time period, a lot of things were not like how it is today. I grew up in this era. I was in college during this time watching the show, and I love it to this day. It's hilarious. The jokes still hold up. I think we all need to be a little bit less sensitive when it comes to comedy and just learn how to laugh. Everybody got it on Cold Monkeys. It didn't matter who you were. Now let's talk about the supporting cast. Let's talk about Mary. Mary is one of GameaVision's programmers and one of the few truly competent people in the building. She is smart, focused, and usually more capable than the men around her. Her character also reflects the boys' club side of early tech and gaming culture, with the show often using her frustration to point out how ridiculous the workplace really is. I absolutely love Mary. I think a lot of people did too, because when you watch her, I always viewed Mary as someone when you're watching the show, you're going like, yeah, she should be running this place. And I always viewed Mary as how the audience will be reacting if they were put in that same predicament. Then we have Todd. Todd is he's GameaVision's fantasy obsessed game designer. He represents the tabletop RPG fantasy and old school nerd culture side of the company. With his dramatic personality and strange behavior, Tom is one of the show's most obvious geek stereotype characters, but he also helps expand the comedy beyond arcade and console references. Dean. Oh, Dean. Dean Larity is Mr. Larity's muscular son and serves as GameaVision's head supervisor. He's not there because of skill, experience, or knowledge of video games. He's there because of nepotism. Dean brings dumb authority and physical intimidation to the office, making him another example of how broken GameaVision's leadership structure is. Then we have the fan favorite everyone loves, Black Steve. Black Steve is hilarious. I love Black Steve. Besides Dave, my favorite character is Dave, then Black Steve, and then I'm actually gonna go with Mary because I love the Mary. Black Steve is GameaVision's accountant. Though his personality is much bigger than that job title suggests, he's aggressive, foul-mouthed, intimidating, and often one of the few people in the company who can push back against the madness around them. He's memorable because he's also a character tied to racial humor and stereotypes that modern viewers may find dated, but still freaking hilarious. Like I said, different time period. Then we have Benny, who will probably be canceled in the most controversial back in the days. Benny is GameaVision's child game tester, and he's one of the show's strangest running jokes. Even though he is mistreated by the company, he has real power because no game can be shipped without his approval. That turns quality assurance into a bizarre office power structure where Dave, Jerry, and the rest of the team often have to bribe Benny in order to get their projects approved. Then you have Claire. Claire is GameaVision's receptionist. She's an airhead, self-centered, image-conscious, and often used crude for office comedy. Compared to Mary, Claire's written as a more broader stereotype. She has that, she still adds to that chaotic workplace energy, but she's also very highly sexual as well. Then you have Clarence. Clarence is just gay. Hey, before once again, before you get at my neck, watch the show and you'll see what I mean. Clarence is Clarence is the audio designer and he appears to be the company's main music department presence, but his big character trait is that he sings all of his dialogue, and most of his dialogue is just about being gay and doing gay things. He is the flamboyant, hypersexualized gay man stereotype. But we all love Clarence because Clarence will come out of nowhere and say something gay and just make you laugh and just go, wow, just so random. Then finally, you have a more smaller supporting cast, but I added her because Dave was just fiending for her, and that's Wendy, and she was an intern at GameaVision. She doesn't have the same presence as the rest of them, but she still helps around the company as this dysfunctional workplace goes. But it's someone that Dave had his apple on his eye for, so I included Wendy in that. So let me just say this: while the supporting cast really made Cold Monkeys feel bigger than just Dave and Larry and Jerry. Mary brought competence. Todd brought fantasy nerd absurdity. Dean brought nepotism. Black Steve brought intensity. Benny brought this twisted game testing satire. Claire brought this receptionist chaos. And Clarence brought some musical awareness and some gay stereotype humor. And Wendy was just kind of there, but she kind of rounded it out. And they made GameaVision feel like the worst video game company imaginable. Every department had its own problems. Every employee had their own strange personalities, and somehow the company kept making games. That dysfunctional energy is exactly why this whole setup worked as a comedy. Now that you have an understanding of the characters, I want to talk about my three favorite episodes from Cold Monkeys. All right, let's talk about my favorite three episodes of Cold Monkeys. Number three, we're going to talk about Drunken Office Party, which aired during season two. And what made this one particularly work is that it takes that classic workplace sitcom setup and it filters it through the Cold Monkey lens. So in this episode, we follow Jerry, who's our main protagonist for this one. And Jerry's usually the nervous, responsible character. So putting him in a situation like this, I thought flipped the show on its head. In this particular episode, we see that Jerry is trying to make amends after getting drunk at the company party, office party. Here's a tip for people, just a life tip in general for anyone watching this. If you have to go to your company's office party and you drink alcohol, I don't really consume alcohol. Me, it's just a rarity. Once in a blue moon, probably I'll have one sip every 6 or 8 months. But if you are someone who consumes alcohol, you get drunk, you like to party, do not get drunk at your office party. That is the fast track to make your work life a complete awkward mess. One drink, leave it alone. Have soda, have juice. Don't get drunk at your company's office party, especially with your employers there. And if you are the employer, don't get drunk with your employees there. That is all. But what makes this stand out, like I said, is that Jerry's usually the nervous, responsible character. So putting him in a situation and he has to kind of fix up his own mess was refreshing. Usually it's Dave, but this particular episode, it was Jerry. And it was funny because you put Jerry in a situation, you put in all these people, these chaotic people in the same room with alcohol, of course things are going to fall by the wayside. And now we have number two, WrestleMania. And this one's one of my favorites as well because one, I'm a huge wrestling fan. I think we all know that. For those who don't, who've just watching this for the first time, I'm a huge wrestling fan. Grew up watching wrestling since I was 4 years old. And what makes this one work is that this episode centers on the GameaVision staff teaming up with professional wrestlers to take on their rivals, Vision. And this is in season one, episode 11, for those who want to know. And this one works especially well because Cold Monkeys already has the energy of an old school arcade beat 'em up game. And then you're adding the wrestling world to that mix, and it felt natural. The rival company angle also helps build out the idea of GameaVision exists in a larger, ridiculous version of the early gaming industry where business competition can turn into physical confrontation at any moment. And it's also a fun episode for viewers who really do enjoy professional wrestling because you have parodies of Macho Man Randy Savage, Andre the Giant, and of course the legend himself, Hulk Hogan. And my favorite episode, my number one, IPO. IPO was when I think a lot of us really became a fan of Black Steve. This is the episode, this is the moment when he did his two songs where I felt that a lot of people was like, you know what? This is my guy. And the whole premise of this episode is that GameaVision goes public and the staff suddenly realizes that they can buy against their own new stock and live like millionaires. Naturally, instead of becoming responsible business people, everyone ran off to chase their dumbest fantasies, which I'm not going to spoil, you just got to watch the episode. But what makes IPO work is that it perfectly captures the show's view of the gaming industry as a place where creative people, greedy executives, and reckless idiots all collide. It's not just about the money, as the Joker would say. It's about what happens when people who have already have no self-control suddenly think they're untouchable. And of course, this also gives a little bit more deeper characterization on some of our favorite supporting cast members as well. Now, you're probably wondering, could cold monkeys work in the 2026 climate? Well, yes and no. I'm going to talk about why cold monkeys could work in the modern day era and why it can't work in the modern day era. Cold monkeys could work in 2026 because gaming culture is no longer for the niche audience. In the era of G4, the show was speaking to a more smaller demographic audience that understood what retro games were, developer jokes, and early gamer culture. In 2026, however, that audience is much, much larger. You could have topics now that people will understand, even the casuals, such as game studios, console wars, independent development, streaming culture is big, esports, fan backlash. We have broken launches, DLC, microtransactions, review bombing, live service disasters, and of course, corporate greed. There's so much topics you can touch on. Could you imagine Jerry dropping a new game in the modern day era? And then somebody who was at that party, and Jerry's game sells really well, and somebody at that party during the drunken office party comes out and tries to cancel him, it will be hilarious and will also be relevant to today in terms of social media. The 8-bit style could also still work too because the retro gaming aesthetics remains popular to this day. I mean, you can just look at the way the RPGs are with Square Enix and other companies going for that 2.5D aesthetics. A Cold Monkeys with the 2.5D aesthetics, I think will work very, very well. Might cost a little bit more, but I think it will work very well. Not to mention the satire that you can think of and just not just poke fun of, but also make light of in social commentary purposes. Now, why it might not work, the hardest part for this will have to be, of course, the humor. The original show was a late 2000s adult comedy, so a lot of its jokes leaned on crude stereotypes, offensive humor, and shock value. In 2026, that might not slide today, and it'll be a tougher sell unless the writing was sharper and more self-aware. I think honestly, it will be a challenge. It'll be a good challenge too, of how to adapt Cold Monkeys for the modern day audience. If you know that the humor that works for me might not work for someone who's way more younger in, I would say, the Gen Alpha or Gen Z type of demographic. So the challenge will have to be, how can the show work? And I'm gonna tell you a little bit why you should kind of check it out still, because Cold Monkeys is worth revisiting because it represents a lost pocket of gamer media. Today, gaming is everywhere. Major studios adapt games into prestigious television shows. The retro aesthetics is great, but Cold Monkeys came from a time when gaming culture still felt like it was fighting for a space in the mainstream. The show also feels more relevant now because audience understands gaming better. And if you're a retro gaming fan, it's still a must watch because it treats gaming history like a comedy playground for animation fans. It's interesting, it's stylish, it's chaotic, and it's one of G4's best shows. Cold Monkeys is crude, some might call it dated, and yes, it's very much a product of its time. But that's what also makes it a cult classic. Its 8-bit style, the gamer references, and chaotic workplace comedy still gives it a unique identity. And in 2026, yeah, it might not be for everybody, but for retro gaming fans out there, it's still worth pressing start on. This is Justin from Nostalgia Trip. I'll catch you on the next one. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And most importantly, visit imaginativevisions.com. Later days.